In this episode, we're going to build the foundation that makes investigations feel controlled instead of chaotic, because the quality of an incident investigation is decided long before the analyst opens the first alert. When a serious event hits, people naturally want answers immediately, yet answers only come quickly when evidence is available, access works, and documentation is consistent. Brand new learners often think investigations fail because of a lack of skill, but the more common reason is that the environment is not prepared for investigation work, so time is wasted on basic logistics. Evidence is scattered, key logs are missing, permissions are unclear, and people argue about what was done and why. The readiness steps we cover here focus on evidence handling, tooling access, and documentation, because these are the three pillars that let a SOC move from suspicion to defensible conclusions without guessing. If you learn to think about these pillars as part of daily operations, you will also understand why so many incident response programs collapse under pressure when these basics were never standardized. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. Evidence handling starts with a simple truth that beginners must internalize early. Evidence is only valuable when it remains trustworthy and interpretable from the moment it is collected to the moment it is used to make a decision. Trustworthy evidence means it has integrity, meaning it has not been altered, and it has completeness, meaning it contains enough information to support the questions you need to answer. Interpretable evidence means it is time-aligned, consistently labeled, and connected to stable identifiers like users, hosts, and resources. A major investigation failure pattern is collecting huge volumes of data while still being unable to answer basic questions, because the evidence is not organized or cannot be correlated. Another failure pattern is losing evidence through delays, retention gaps, or missing sources, which forces analysts to rely on assumptions. Evidence handling is not only about storing logs somewhere, but about controlling how evidence is captured, preserved, accessed, and referenced during stressful moments. When you treat evidence handling as a discipline, you protect investigations from the two worst outcomes: being unable to prove what happened and being tricked into believing a false narrative because the evidence was incomplete or untrustworthy. A core concept in evidence handling is preserving integrity through careful control of where evidence lives and who can change it, because attackers and accidents both threaten evidence reliability. If evidence remains only on the system that was attacked, it can be erased or modified, and even well-intentioned recovery steps can overwrite what you needed to see. When evidence is forwarded off-system quickly and stored in a protected location, the chance of silent tampering is reduced, and investigations become more confident. Integrity also depends on access separation, meaning the people who can view evidence are not automatically the same people who can modify collection settings or delete datasets. This separation protects you from both malicious misuse and accidental mistakes under pressure. Another integrity factor is monitoring for pipeline health, because missing evidence is sometimes caused by collection failure rather than by attacker stealth, and both look like silence if you do not track source activity. The practical takeaway is that evidence integrity is an operational design feature, not a moral expectation, and you must build it into the collection and storage process before an incident begins. Time is one of the most underestimated elements of evidence handling, yet investigations are fundamentally timeline exercises, and bad time data turns a timeline into a confusing puzzle. When systems disagree about time, events appear out of order, causality becomes unclear, and analysts waste effort reconciling what should have been straightforward. This is why time synchronization and consistent timestamps are a foundational investigation requirement, even though it sounds unglamorous. Time also matters in the sense of retention, because investigations often require looking backward to see when access began, how long persistence existed, and what happened before the first alert. If retention is too short for key sources, you may detect an incident yet be unable to reconstruct the entry path, which makes eradication and prevention much harder. Time also affects ingestion delay, because an alert that arrives hours late can push response into a purely historical mode, even while the attacker continues. Strong evidence handling includes knowing what time quality looks like, checking for drift, and validating that critical sources arrive with reliable timing. When time is treated as evidence, not as a background assumption, investigations become faster and conclusions become more defensible. Evidence handling also includes the discipline of preserving context, because evidence without context can be technically accurate, yet practically unusable. Context includes knowing which system generated the evidence, what that system's role is, who owns it, and what normal behavior looks like around it. Context also includes knowing whether a record represents a success or a failure, whether an action was approved, and whether the identity involved is privileged. This is where enrichment and normalization, if done well, become investigation accelerators, because they attach meaning to events at the moment an analyst needs it most. Without context, analysts are forced into manual lookups, and manual lookups are slow and inconsistent, especially across shifts. Evidence handling should therefore include a plan for identity resolution, asset criticality, and ownership mapping so that evidence can be interpreted quickly. This does not mean collecting private details unnecessarily, but it does mean ensuring the evidence record can answer the most common investigative questions without external scavenger hunts. When context is built into evidence handling, your investigation starts at analysis, not at administrative search. Another investigation foundation is the chain of custody, COC, which is a simple concept that becomes crucial when evidence might be used for formal reporting, disciplinary action, legal review, or external communication. The idea is that you should be able to show where evidence came from, who accessed it, how it was stored, and whether it was altered, so that the evidence remains credible. Even in environments that never reach a courtroom, COC thinking improves discipline because it encourages careful handling and reduces accidental contamination. Contamination can happen when someone makes changes on a system before capturing key artifacts, or when evidence files are copied around without tracking versions. COC also encourages a habit of capturing evidence in a repeatable way, which is particularly helpful when multiple people are working in parallel. For beginner learners, the key is not to memorize formal legal language, but to understand the practical purpose. If you cannot explain how you know the evidence is trustworthy, your conclusions are weaker and your decisions are harder to defend. ASOC that treats evidence handling as a controlled process produces better investigations and fewer disputes after the incident. Tooling access is the second pillar, and it is often the hidden reason investigations slow down, because a team can have excellent telemetry in theory, but be unable to reach it when needed. Tooling access includes having the right accounts, permissions, and connectivity to query logs, view endpoint activity, review identity events, and correlate across sources. It also includes knowing how to access those tools quickly under stress, including when a primary environment is degraded or when remote access pathways are constrained during containment. A common failure pattern is discovering during an incident that only one person has the necessary access, or that access requires a series of approvals that cannot be obtained quickly. Another failure pattern is over-permissioning, where many people have broad access, increasing risk and making evidence integrity harder to trust. The investigation foundation is therefore balanced access, enough access to move quickly, but controlled enough to protect sensitive evidence and prevent accidental damage. When tooling access is designed intentionally, the SOC can investigate at the speed of thought rather than at the speed of ticketing systems and permission requests. A key aspect of tooling access is role clarity, because different investigation tasks require different permissions, and confusion about roles creates delays and mistakes. Analysts typically need to search and pivot through evidence without altering collection settings, while engineers may need to adjust parsing or pipeline issues without being able to rewrite case history. Incident commanders may need summary dashboards and decision context without being able to access sensitive raw logs unnecessarily. This role separation reduces risk while also improving efficiency, because people are not blocked by the need to request access that should never have been required for their job. Tooling access also includes service accounts and integrations, and these are particularly sensitive because they can become powerful pathways into multiple systems if compromised. Strong foundations include secure handling of secrets, controlled rotation practices, and clear ownership of integration permissions. For beginner learners, the most important idea is that access should be predictable because unpredictable access forces improvisation, and improvisation under incident pressure produces errors. When roles and permissions are planned ahead, investigation becomes a repeatable process rather than a scramble. Tooling access also involves preparedness for the practical reality that incidents often occur alongside partial outages, degraded services, or intentional containment actions that change connectivity. If an investigation depends on one central system that becomes unavailable, the team can be blinded at the worst moment. This is why resilient access patterns matter, such as having alternative ways to retrieve essential logs, having local caching where appropriate, and having clear procedures for what to do when a primary analysis platform is unreachable. Resilience also means knowing which tools are essential for the first hour of investigation, because not everything must be available immediately, but certain capabilities are foundational. Those foundational capabilities include the ability to validate identity activity, review endpoint behavior on affected systems, and correlate key events across time. Another resilience factor is ensuring the monitoring pipeline is itself observable, so you can distinguish a true reduction in activity from a loss of telemetry. For beginners, it is helpful to understand that tooling access is not only about credentials, but about operational continuity, because access that fails during stress is not real access. When access is resilient, investigation speed and confidence both increase. Documentation is the third pillar, and it is the one that most directly prevents chaos because it turns private reasoning into shared understanding across time, people, and teams. During an incident, information changes quickly, assumptions get corrected, and evidence accumulates. And without documentation, the team loses track of what is known and what is only suspected. Documentation also prevents duplicated work because multiple analysts might chase the same lead if they cannot see what has already been checked. Good documentation is not long, but it is specific, capturing what was observed, what evidence supports it, what was ruled out, and what decisions were made. It should also capture why decisions were made, especially when actions are disruptive, because later review and learning depends on understanding the rationale. For brand new learners, the key mindset is that documentation is part of investigation control, not a report written later, because control depends on being able to coordinate and hand off work smoothly. When documentation is consistent, investigations become faster because the team can build on prior work instead of rebuilding it each shift. A strong documentation foundation begins with a consistent case record structure, because structure is what makes documentation usable under pressure. A useful case record captures initial detection context, the current hypothesis, the scope as it is known so far, and the key evidence references that support or challenge the hypothesis. It also captures the timeline of major events and decisions, because the sequence of actions matters for understanding impact and preventing repeated mistakes. Another important element is capturing key pivots, like the identity involved, host identifiers, and relevant time windows, so that anyone can reproduce the investigation steps quickly. Structure should also include clear status, such as whether the incident is suspected, confirmed, contained, or in recovery, because teams need shared phase awareness to coordinate. Consistent structure supports handoffs because the receiving analyst knows where to look for the core story rather than hunting through free-form notes. For beginners, the most important idea is that documentation should reduce cognitive load, meaning it should make the work easier to continue, not harder to produce. When structure is consistent, documentation becomes faster, and that speed pays back immediately during handoffs. Documentation must also preserve evidence references in a way that remains stable, because investigations often require revisiting earlier facts after new information changes the hypothesis. If notes say saw suspicious login without pointing to where that evidence came from, later reviewers cannot validate or challenge the claim, and the team can become trapped in memory-based decision-making. Stable references might include unique event identifiers, query parameters, or consistent evidence bookmarks, depending on what systems exist, but the principle is that evidence should be reproducible. This reproducibility matters for internal trust, because teams make better decisions when they can verify each other's claims quickly rather than debating impressions. It also matters for later lessons learned, because improvements depend on knowing what signals were present and how they were interpreted. Another documentation best practice is to separate observation from interpretation, meaning clearly marking what the logs show versus what you believe they mean, because early hypotheses are often wrong. For beginners, the goal is not to write formally, but to write clearly enough that another person can follow the chain of reasoning and the chain of evidence. When documentation supports verification, investigations become more accurate and less emotional. Evidence handling, tooling access, and documentation connect most powerfully at the moment of handoff, because handoff is where poorly prepared foundations turn into chaos. A handoff might occur because a shift ends, because the incident escalates to a different team, or because specialized expertise is needed, and the handoff must preserve both the evidence and the reasoning. If evidence access is inconsistent, the receiving person may not be able to replicate the steps that led to a conclusion, which causes delays and doubts. If documentation is vague, the receiving person may repeat work or pursue outdated assumptions, which wastes time and increases risk. If evidence handling is weak, the receiving person may not trust the evidence or may find gaps that force guesswork. Strong foundations make handoffs smooth because they ensure the next person can pick up the investigation thread immediately, verify what has been done, and extend the work confidently. For beginners, this is one of the clearest ways to understand why foundations matter. A strong investigation is not just one person being smart, but a team being able to operate as one mind across time. Foundations make teamwork possible when pressure is high. Another reason these foundations prevent chaos is that they reduce the chance of conflicting actions, which is a common incident failure when multiple groups act without shared information. If documentation and evidence references are clear, teams can coordinate containment and recovery steps without accidentally destroying the evidence needed to confirm scope. If tooling access roles are clear, engineers can adjust pipelines without analysts losing visibility, and analysts can investigate without altering the environment unintentionally. If evidence handling integrity is strong, leadership can trust the reporting and make decisions with confidence rather than demanding repeated proof. These are not abstract benefits, because incidents often involve disagreements about what is true, what is urgent, and what is safe, and disagreements are fueled by missing evidence and unclear records. Foundations create a shared truth layer, which shortens debates and accelerates coordinated action. For beginners, it is important to realize that technical skill cannot compensate for a lack of shared truth when time is short. When you build foundations early, you create the conditions where technical skills can actually succeed. As we close, keep a simple integrated takeaway in your mind. Investigations move fast only when evidence is trustworthy, access is reliable, and documentation is consistent enough to support teamwork. Evidence handling protects integrity, preserves time alignment, and ensures context is available so events can be interpreted without constant lookups. Tooling access ensures the right people can reach the right evidence quickly under stress, with roles and permissions designed for least privilege and operational continuity. Documentation turns investigation work into shared understanding, supporting handoffs, preventing duplicated effort, and preserving the chain from observation to conclusion. When these foundations are weak, incident response becomes chaotic, not because people are careless, but because the environment forces improvisation and guesswork. When these foundations are strong, the SOC can transition from alert handling into incident investigation with calm discipline, because the evidence is there, the tools work, and the record keeps everyone aligned. For exam thinking, the key is that these foundations are not optional extras, but prerequisites for every later phase of the incident response cycle. If you can explain how these pillars prevent chaos later, you are demonstrating the operational maturity that effective security operations requires.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit BareMetalCyber.com.